Hey everyone, and welcome to Weird Encounters. Thanks so much for joining us for the show. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you're a regular listener, thanks for coming back. We have another amazing interview lined up for you, and tonight I'm talking to Christine Ann, who's had 5 encounters with what she believes to be a Dogman type creature. These encounters started when she was a child, and they've continued throughout her adult life. But I'll let Christine get into that in just a moment. If you're listening to us on YouTube, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the amazing content here on the Untold Radio Network. If you're listening on one of your favorite podcatchers, please make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button over there as well. And make sure you head over to untoldradioam.com and check out all of our amazing content and the other shows that you can catch on our network. Our amazing hosts drop new content each and every day, so make sure you don't miss an episode. But enough of that. I know you're here for the weird encounter, so I'm going to stop talking. You guys sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
When I wrote my book, I said I was just visiting family. I think I pretty much left it vague at that, and I wandered off. But me and my older sibling had an agreement that I would not chop any vines and go vine swinging by myself because, I might pick a bad one and get hurt. And me and my younger brother thought, he's been spacing us all day on doing this. I'm smart enough. I'm not going to be that stupid. And I chopped down a vine and we were having a good time. We were swinging out, just, goofing off. And I swung out and sure enough, the tree uprooted and me and the vine went one way and the rest of the tree went another. And I tumbled down the side of the mountain in West Virginia. I think it was 1981 or 82. It's a summer. And I hit a rock, and there was like a flattish area. And it had this really rank smell to it. I mean, it was god-awful. I always compared it to rotted meat, an elderly facility that's not well kept up. It was just horrible. But when I looked up, I saw a huge dog sitting on its haunch, just kind of looking at me, and it was still off a little bit in the shade, so I couldn't tell what color its eyes were, or I just don't remember because I was looking at the spots on its face. I was thinking, I don't know of any spotted dogs. But then the dogs that are my siblings came down the hill, and they tried to go between me and the big dog. I mean, it was huge. I was like 4'11" at the time, and it on its haunch was bigger than I was. So I was really scared, but kind of curious because every time I moved my head this way, it would move its head the same way. If I moved it back over to figure it out, it would do it. It was copying my moves. It was just kind of a weird experience that it would do that. But when the dogs got there, it stood up all the way, and it had to be over 6 feet tall, easily. I'd say between 6 and 6.5 feet. But definitely over the 6 foot mark. I got really tense there for a while, and my heart was beating fast. The rescue workers were coming down, and it heard my name being called, and it ran off into the forest, and they had mentioned when they were down there that they thought they found a den of some sort. So once I was home from the hospital, my his sibling and his wife were discussing the matter. And they said when they went back down, it had been destroyed. They were still having the disturbances from time to time at night. Is where it changes in the story, too, because I put this incident as being on the second location, but it was on the first. And we were home one night, just me and his wife, and all of a sudden something kept trying to open the back door, and the dogs were just going nuts. They'd be charging the door one minute and whining and crying the next. There's not as much lighting on the back side of the house as there is on the front side because the front side's got 2 major doorways there. It got so bad. I mean, any place where it was dark on that side, we kept hearing weird noises. It was hard to explain. It didn't sound to me like a dog as much as it sounded like there was actual, like, wolves outside or something. But that's also the imagination of a 12 or 13-year-old too, I'm sure. But we finally called him in a panic because we thought they were actually going to be able to get in, or whatever it was going to get in. And he came home, and they shined the lights and everything, and everything went back to normal that night. But I was so terrified I wouldn't go outside after that. And I was completely healed by then, so they let me go down and visit with my grandmother and grandpa. And being down there and being over another mountainside, I actually think it's 2 mountainsides over, I thought, wow, this is cool. This is what I'm going to do. I can go back outside now and go enjoy everything. So when my grandma told me, hey, take this food up to one of the elderly neighbors, I said, sure, Grandma, I'll do it. And so I took in the food up to the neighbor, and I started feeling about one of her neighbor's houses up above the post office, like there was something following me in the woods. And that feeling wouldn't go away. I had this sense of doom. I don't remember feeling that the first time. There was no sense of doom. There was this massive curiosity, and it seemed like it was coming from both sides. Whereas this was just outright doom and gloom type feeling. And when I got there, I visited for a while because the wonderful old lady, she had been born in the turn of the century, 1900s, and lived through the 1920s, so she told the most wonderful stories. I'm probably carbon dating myself right now, but that's okay. And when I went back, I was like, oh, I probably should call my grandfather to come get me. And I was like, nah, it's not quite dark yet, but, I had a little bit to walk to go back, and it was getting dark. It was around dusk, about 6 p.m. And this was in summertime, so it was either July or August, because it's very hot in Arizona during that time, so our grandparents would send us back east. Our parents would send us back east to visit with family. It took us a while to get used to the summers down here in Arizona. On the way back, I kept getting that feeling it was getting more and more intense, that something was following me in the woods. And then all of a sudden, as I'm nearing the post office, a big old tom turkey comes flying out of the forest right over the top of my head. Nearly gave me a heart attack. My heart's pumping and racing. I'm caught between just staying where I am on the ground and knowing I have to get up off the road, because it was like a 747 going over my head. It was loud, and it was kind of scary because I didn't know that wild turkeys could fly. And then as I was standing back up, as when I saw another hyena like Dogman, only this one I could see it has eyes were sort of a bright yellowish color. He was taller. I don't know how much taller because it was on the side of the mountain, but I think he'd be between 6.5 to 7 feet tall. And he just gave me this really bad feeling. And so I took off running. I ran around our aunt's fence, around our fence, and then up the yard. And then I just wanted to go home. And so I did. I didn't know what they were. I didn't really give it another thought after that. By the time we came back the next summer, all was well. No permanent damage was done, I just thought, I saw something odd out there that, defied what was norm for that area.
If we could, I want to go back to your first sighting.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of went right into it, so I wanted to just sort of clarify for the audience. You were out with your cousins and a group of folks, and you guys were just playing, and you were swinging or whatever it was that you were doing before you fell, correct?
It was just me and my younger brother.
Okay.
I was staying with family, my cousin and my brother and my younger brother.
You had the fall and you bumped your head, and then you see this creature.
I did.
How far away was the creature when you saw it during the first encounter?
I think it was probably less than 500 feet. It was not that far away from me.
In as much detail, could you describe the face, the body features? And I know this thing, you said it was sitting down the whole time. Was it sitting the whole time that you saw it?
It only stood up at the once when the dogs were trying to charge it. They changed their mind.
I got you. I can only imagine. So just in as much detail, could you describe the face and the features that you could make out?
What shocked me the most, and I didn't know as much about them now as I did, as much about them then as I do now. But these ones had spots on their faces, and they had a dark brownish and red coat, but they also had like little bits of yellowish in them, white. They strongly resembled a hyena. But to me, they were just a dog with a underbite. You could see the front of on the jaws. You can see that the lower jaw stuck out more than the back did, and the way it's shaped is kind of odd. It has like a little bit of a mane, but not like a lot. And it has little tufts of hair around its ears, which I don't know what's for, but both of them had that. Both of them had those little tufts of hair. It's kind of hard to tell from where I was because it was sitting down, but its hair seemed longish than the other ones that I've seen.
I know some people say Dogman, but what was it man-like at all? Was it just like a really big
It was when it stood up. But the back legs were dog-like. The midsection and the way it moved so fluently was more human-like. But for the most part, this one looked like a giant-sized dog, or in this case, a giant-sized hyena. Because when I saw a hyena the first time, I remembered this thing.
When it stood up, was it on all fours or was it on its hind legs?
It was just hunched back like it was kneeling almost. It was on all fours, but it was hunched back and all fours were touching the ground. So I'm not exactly sure how they sit. If it was just resting there or if there was a den there, was it protecting it or what it was. But I still lean towards, and can't really tell you why, but it looked like it had some sort of breast development. So I still think it was a female and not a male.
I got you. In the first encounter, I assumed the dogs is what scared this creature off. When the dogs started charging it eventually made its way off.
No, it heard the rescue workers coming down the hill.
I got you.
It didn't like the idea of there being more people, I think.
Okay.
It seemed more shy. That one seemed more shy and curious, whereas the second one in West Virginia, he just seemed like he was up to mischief. And that one was definitely a male because he had a broader chest and more hair along the ears and along the chest. But there still was that little bit of area that didn't have no hair at all, or wasn't to the point where I could actually see it. But like the other one, it walked more like a dog than a human. It had those big hocks on it, like a dog, but the hands were hands, but they had claws on them, very long claws. I still think they were only like 2 to 3 inches, and theirs seemed to curve just a little bit.
So the hands, when you're describing what would be a paw on a dog, was more human-like? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so that was your second encounter. I know you've had other encounters with these things. Sort of take us into that next encounter and tell us where you were, what you were doing, and what happened during that encounter.
The third encounter was terrifying in that I was driving home late from EMS school, emergency medical services. I'm a medic, and I stayed late to help a fellow student practice some skills. And I was driving home. It was probably 11, 12 o'clock at night. And I stopped because suddenly, for no reason at all, there's a bunch of deer running across the road. Now, I live in Arizona. This is in 2013. But I live in the high part. I do live up in the mountainous area. And pretty much the thickest part of the forest is where I live. And it runs right along the creek bed, too. So we get plenty of deer and javelina and everything from time to time. It was between 11 and 12, and I stopped at the deer, and it looked like one of the bucks had turned its head away, and next thing I know, it hits my truck. But it said that that's not likely to happen. It's more likely they got thrown into my truck, which would be supported by the huge dent it left in my truck. Because even though it was running, I was at a dead stop, and there wouldn't have been any need for the deer to turn its head. So I do think maybe that is, because the next thing I know, there's a long, black, hairy arm reaches over and grabs around the deer's neck. About the same time, a set of very large teeth go into its neck. And it just seemed like this big red eye was staring at me. So this happened really quick, and like probably altogether just noticed a bunch of little things at a time. But when it stood up, it was bigger than my truck, and I had a F-150 at the time. So it made it, probably close to 8.5 feet. And it had these really creepy red eyes. Now, there wasn't hardly any moon that night. Now, I don't know how much that plays into eye color or, whatnot. But I just stuck the truck up in reverse and hit it because it was going towards my house. It's like, well, we're going to go that way. I'm going the opposite way, and so I stayed with my my husband that night over at his house instead of going home because I was afraid of going past the Dogman on the road. So this Dogman, I honestly thought it was just the ugliest bear I'd seen at first. It was kind of long hair, but not all the way. The chest was there, the hands were there, except for the claws area. But it was definitely dog-like because it was more wolf-like. Bigger jawline, like a dog with the fangs and the creepy red eyes, pointed ears. The only time his ears were down was when he actually bit into the deer. The next morning, my husband did ask me, he goes, "What did you hit with the car?" I said, "I didn't hit anything. A deer ran into me last night." And he goes, "Well, a deer doesn't have black hair." And he showed me the hair he had taken off the front of my grill. And it must have been up by the front of the grill. And I don't know how he got up there, but I just remember it coming from the side. So I don't know if there was more than one. And this was just how they captured their meal or what to do with. But it left me with some fear to be that vulnerable and to face something that big in the middle of the road. And I didn't think anything could be more frightening than that. But my fourth encounter was by far and away the most frightening because it was the first time I got a really, really good look up close as to how these guys are, how big they really are and how intimidating they can be. I had watched Josh Brolin movies until late night between 1 and 2 with Grandma, and I had gone up to bed, and it was just my regular routine. I smoke a cigarette before I go to bed, and I was going to go out on my balcony and have a cigarette, and almost as soon as I did, I hear something coming, what I thought was a tree beside my room. In retrospect, that wouldn't have gave me enough time to get back into my room, because, this thing came up the tree fast, so it probably came from the one in front of the house. And I'll share my theory with you about why after this story, but it came up the tree, and I jumped back inside my room. I laughed, and I locked the door and threw the bolt, and I was going to turn the light off, and then it was gone. And I was expecting to hear like a mountain lion type noise or bear maybe, but instead I was just hearing these dog-like noises, wolf-like noises, and it didn't help that it was a full moon. So, of course, I was curious to prove to myself that I was wrong. I set this room up specifically so I would not have to deal with the open space of all the windows that are pretty much full off. It's like 92 and 93% windows, and the walls are kind of thin. It was an add-on that her second or third husband built to the house when they bought it, and that entire area up there is very flimsy. So I peeked out, and staring back at me are big yellow eyes, pointy ears, and the biggest muzzle I've ever seen. And I just about died. I peed right where I was. Both my dogs took off, and then it put its hand up against the thing, and I could see that they have those things like dogs do, but not exactly. The pads, they're on their hands. And it was kind of creepy. I could see those nails more, and I could see that they are curved. And I had my attention for a while because I was afraid he was going to bust through it and just grab me by the neck and pull me out. But he just stood there and stared at me, making all kinds of noises. And then he started throwing things off the loft porch, which terrified me. I don't know. It was just the CPAP and the mirror. My table and chair went off. And then I could hear that the porch itself was starting to give under his weight. And it was definitely a male. It just, as soon as he felt that, he did a creepy thing. He used one of his fingers and just opened up the gate and jumped off the roof and went over towards the creek. He took the fence in one leap and the creek in less than 1-2. So, well, no, not less than 1, but, probably like a single bounce. They definitely have some speed and agility to them. The 50 counter is the most recent, and the 50 counter happened in January. I kept having this dream about this meadow and talking with a dogman, and I hadn't really talked to many people about this because it was weird how it happened. But, I kind of got the feeling when we got up to where we were going that this was the actual meadow I'd been dreaming about, but I wasn't sure. I was starting to feel a little trapped in the lodge due to the cold weather. It was a happy -6 out, and I was loving it. They had some attractions there that I thought were really special. They had some Clydesdales, like little Malamute, and a lady had asked me to go feed the horses some apples and make sure I set them palm up so they don't nip me. And so I was going down to the corral to feed the horses, and I was down there, and all of a sudden they started acting really weird. I was a little nervous. They had killed a mountain lion in the area a few days before, and I didn't know if she was alone, if she had cubs, and if so, how old, blah, blah, blah. The Malamute start to try to push me to go back, and I threw the apples out into the forest, I figured something would eat them. And I let the Malamute and the retriever guide me up there, but they're seriously trying the herding part and knock me over. And I noticed that there's a footprint in the snow that's a bit unusual looking. It's extremely large, and it's very human-like, in that it had like toes and stuff like that. If I had to, I would have said that it resembled a Sasquatch footprint, and there was a few in the snow, but nothing in the mud itself that I saw. So I went in, I got my binoculars and the camera, and I was sitting down, and I was just watching the meadow when the dogman came out of it. At first, I didn't think it was real because in 2000 or so, it was 2000, we had a fire up that area, the Rodeo Chesney fire, and it charred a huge amount of land, and you could still see the scars from it up there. And this is along the White Mountains. The new book I'm working on, there have been many people who have claimed to see the Bogeyman monster, Arizona's Bigfoot. So I went to go up to record some of the sightings up there and stuff, but there was one lady who told me about an incident that happened on the road between a dogman and a Sasquatch that didn't end well for the dogman. So I went up there to check out what it looks like up in that area, talk to these people, and, relax for my birthday. And the last thing I expected to actually see, since I wasn't doing any hiking, because I still wasn't well enough yet to do it, was a dogman on the other side of the meadow just staring at me. But this one isn't like any other one of the ones I've seen. The other ones are like big dogs. This one looks like a cross between a Sasquatch and a dogman. He has humanoid-like legs, just thickly covered in hair, big feet, but his muzzle is smaller, and he's got a thicker mane, and his hands appear more humanoid-like, but they still have those claws on them. And his eyes, I couldn't make out because he was way far away from me. We had a pretty good-sized meadow between us, but he came out the tree line into the sunlight so I could see him. They didn't seem to have a very noticeable color from where I was, but if I had to guess, I'd say they were probably either blue or yellowish. It definitely was a non-threatening type of encounter. I did cross into the meadow without knowing I did it, but there was a second cat, and it had followed me across the meadow, and the hunters that were hunting for the little elk ended up shooting the cat before it could get to me. And one of the big male Malamute had already knocked me to the ground. So I had to wonder if I hadn't have gone out there if I would have ended up kitty chow. That's why it's still hard to talk about it because I had no idea that cat was there. It's like I was in a trance. I crossed the major highway. I didn't know it. I had no idea what happened until the dog knocked me down. And I was trying to get out underneath a 190-pound dog. Didn't breathe. It's like, what's going on?
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm fascinated by this last encounter with the sort of hybrid Dogman sort of Sasquatch creature that you saw. When you say it was Sasquatch-like and somewhat Dogman-like, what parts were more? Was any part more human than the other? Was it more ape-like? Was the upper half more?
It from the neck down pretty much. I thought I was seeing a Sasquatch. I was so excited because I had one maybe experience with them when I was little, when I was up at 3. But this, I'm thinking, yay, I'm finally getting my turn. And then I get to the top, I was like, well, damn, it's another Dogman. and who in the right mind says that?
Right.
So that was my reaction. I was like, damn, it's just another Dogman. What surprised me was this muzzle is actually shorter, and its ears were pointed differently. They were a little bit more like a German Shepherd, and kind of smaller than the last one I've seen too. But he had to be over 9 feet tall.
And it was standing on its hind legs. It was bipedal?
It was strictly bipedal. Even when it turned around, what shocked me the most is it didn't have a tail and a butt and a bottom. And the weirdest thing is I found on my truck the next day green rock. And I don't know what the green rock was for. I don't even know why it helped me get away from mountain lion, but I'm glad it did. It really sucked to die on my birthday.
Well, I want to ask you.
I do have a good sense of humor. I have a sense of humor about that one.
Well, I guess you would almost have to, because otherwise it would be one of the most terrifying things I've ever heard anybody describe. So the fact that you have a decent sense of humor about it, I think is very admirable, because I don't think a lot of people in your position could have that sort of outlook on what you've seen and what you've experienced since a child, basically. But I guess that's the question that I want to ask you is, you've had all these encounters, and I've heard Dogman encounters before, and I've always been fascinated with them, and I don't know what to make of them. Of course, I do a show about people who encounter 9-foot apes most of the time, running around in places that are not supposed to exist, and that seems somewhat normal. But Dogman encounters are something totally different in that it just doesn't fit in any sort of a box, right? There's no box to check for a bipedal, half man, half dog looking being. Now, what you've described is more dog-like in appearance, but some of the encounters are basically describing a werewolf. It's a bipedal animal that's half man, half dog. And I think it's very difficult for some people to rationalize and sort of grasp that. And it's a lot easier, I think, to wrap your mind around a possible relic hominid that's running around undiscovered in North America and basically every continent in the world. But you've had these experiences and you've seen these things relatively close on numerous occasions. I guess the first question I'll ask, I'll save that other question. I'll ask this first question. Why do you think you've had this many encounters, and why you is the question I would ask. Have you asked yourself that question? I'm sure after 5 encounters, you've almost had to, right? So I'm curious as to what your answer is.
Well, I think it has to do with 2 reasons. One, ever since I was 4 or 5, I go off into the woods by myself. I'm really bad about it. I feel more at home there, more in harmony with nature. And I come from both Gypsy and Native American blood, so it might be the magic allure. Who knows? I don't believe in magic per se, but I do think that some of it might be that they can sense I'm just a real compassionate person overall, just why I became a medic.
I love medics. I was a police officer, so I really have a lot of respect for medics and what you do every day, so I appreciate your service. And I think I've heard a lot of stories about people who have had repeated sightings of Bigfoot. It's when you have a Sasquatch encounter, it's probably like winning the lottery. And I'm not comparing it as to the elation or the joy or the good things with winning the lottery. I'm just saying just the pure chance of seeing a Sasquatch is like winning the lottery. Yet I talk to people who have had multiple encounters throughout their life, from childhood up to adulthood, and even, some of them are just a lot of adult sightings that they've had since being an adult. And it fascinates me. And I think a lot of that goes to the way that you see the world, your personal experiences, and maybe even to some degree your heritage. I know I talked to a lot of Native Americans who have multiple encounters with Sasquatch, and it's just a known thing in the Native community that these things have been around since the beginning of time. So I think they're more...
We believe that about the Dogman, too.
I was curious.
People know that, but we do believe that about the Dogman, too. They are depicted in some of our ancient writings. In both heritages, I noticed that. There were rumored that there were actual werewolf hunters back in the day who used to hunt werewolves, and that was their profession. And what it was is they were hunting these huge bipedal canines, and they take the heads as trophies if they could catch them. The closest one I can tell you about is the guy who killed the one in France in 1767, I believe it was, in the summer. He was from a family of werewolf hunters, too, as well. And he melted down silver, which is supposed to cripple them, and was able to bring down the beast that way, supposedly. So, you have a lot of different tales throughout history that date back to the lichens. And just as I pointed out in the latest book, the Kraken was thought to be a myth and nothing more. But if you ever looked at that picture that Homer drew, it was of a giant squid or octopus. We know this today because in 2007, we discovered it. But even as a child, I looked at that picture and I said, wouldn't it be cool if there was a giant octopus out there somewhere or a giant squid? And why wouldn't they be able to exist? There's plenty of water out there.
Very true.
That's the way I think. That's the way I think.
Well, so, I guess my last question is this. Given the experience you have, given the knowledge that you clearly have of the subject, what do you think these things are?
I think they're some kind of natural creature. I think that's why there's a variation, because there's variations in how Bigfoots live and what they eat, depending on the area that they live. Like in some areas, them and Dogman can live in harmony, in other places they can't. And a lot of that has to do with how much food is available for them. And then you have man encroaching on their areas, and it causes even more strain and conflict. So I forgot the question. I was going to.
Yeah, the question was, what do you think Dogman is?
But I do think the reason there are so many different types, the hyena type, the German Shepherd type, the type that look like cats, the big wolf-like ones that are absolutely terrifying to look at, and maybe even the crossbreed between the two, the Sasquatches and the Dogman, is because they are national species that are supposed to be here. Because I look at all the wonderful things that Mother Nature herself has done, and some of her creatures look really bizarre. When I was down in Louisiana, I saw an armor-plated fish. I mean, he was really plated up. I've seen platypuses. I mean, they look like a cross between a duck and a beaver. So I do think they're a natural creature. But I also think you need to show them the respect that's due them. Some of the people I'm writing about right now are lucky they escaped their encounters, because it wasn't for anything they did specifically, except for one rehosted a weapon, and the other one just laid out all her food and ran for it.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that some people have different encounters. It's the same scenario basically with Sasquatch encounters, that some are pleasant, and more often than not, they're aggressive. And it's a very traumatizing, terrorized sort of situation when people encounter these things. So I think for you to have had 5 encounters in your life, it could have gone way different if something wasn't looking out for you, or things didn't go your way, because I think whatever Dogman is and whatever Sasquatch is, I think they both have the propensity to be very dangerous, because I do think they're an animal of some sort.
I agree. You know, I see a lot of similarities in what we do know about the Sasquatches between the chimp behavior. And that's worrisome, because I would have thought their behavior would be more closely related to, say, the silverbacks. But their behavior actually is more close to a chimps. And chimps, I don't know if you know this, that chimps, they're the warring species of the apes. The only ape that even comes close is mankind themselves.
Yeah, and I've heard that. It seems to depend on what region of the country you're in. You know, Pacific Northwest, Sasquatch tends to be bigger, and the encounters seem to be more benign and less aggressive. The farther south you go, Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, Alabama, in the Carolinas, where I'm at here in North Carolina, Louisiana, I've heard some really aggressive behaviors, and some of the folks that I've interviewed from Louisiana, with dogs being thrown out of the woods and one stomped to death and killed in the woods. So it seems to be a regional thing as well, and I don't really know what to make of that. I just think it's very interesting.
Down in Georgia, they do have an area, which I promise I wouldn't disclose, but where there's a lot of Sasquatches and a lot of Dogmen, and they've come into conflict. And that actually dates back to a couple of warring tribes also were in that area. They sent out braves from both sides, and they ended up getting slaughtered. So there's a lot of history in the South for these creatures, both of them.
Yeah,
so.
I hear it all over the South. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing your experiences. I really do appreciate your time, and I'm glad we got to hear it.
Okay, thank you. You have a good night.
Absolutely, you too.